In Houston, Texas, it's about 300 miles from Uvalde. Top Republican politicians have gathered for the NRA's annual meeting, despite calls from Democrats and gun safety advocates to cancel this year's event. In just the last few minutes, they heard from Texas Senator Ted Cruz, and they expect the former twice-impeached ex-president to take the stage momentarily. What a treat. Joining us now, NBC News correspondent Shaq Brewster, live from outside the NRA convention in Houston. Shaq, this is a day where the story outside is as big or arguably bigger than the story inside. Tell us what you're seeing.
Yeah, I'm sure you can hear the crowds that are outside the convention center right now because, you know, there was a lot of controversy over the existence of this NRA convention. I just want to give you a heads up of what you're seeing right here. You see the crowd of protesters. This is no longer the official protest where you saw Beto O'Rourke speak at or Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. These are people who have come out to protest and demonstrate against the convention center and against the convention that you're seeing there. And you see a heavy police presence outside. And every once in a while, you'll probably see this as I'm reporting, you'll see some of the convention goers walk out and you'll hear the crowd uproar. So I just want to give you a sense of what that would be if you do hear that from the crowd. But you mentioned this is something that has gotten a lot of attention, somewhat more attention than what you have inside there. And that's because people have been calling for, after the devastation that we saw just about 4 hours away, and I'll let you kind of take a look at what you're seeing over there. After people saw the devastation of what happened in a town just about 4 hours away, they expected either this convention not to happen or at least there to be a different tone from the speakers inside. But you really haven't gotten that. We did hear from Governor Greg Abbott, who did not appear here in person, but did record that video. And in his appearance, he said that there are hundreds of gun laws on the books already. He said that the shooter already committed a felony once he brought a gun onto the campus there. There was nothing that he signaled or nothing that he said that signaled that any new gun legislation would be coming. And you hear from the passion around here, that is what folks are asking for. The people out here, they have very specific demands. They want an assault weapons ban. They want universal background checks. You hear mentions of red flag laws. One thing that you continue to also hear, Nicole, is a deep pessimism that they'll get any of that. But that's not stopping them. They say that they still want to be here. They still want to let their voice be heard. They want to put pressure on people outside because it's so important to them. And for them, it's a matter of life and death, Nicole.
Do these protesters feel a different sort of wind at their back with the speaking out that has crossed culture? You had Steve Kerr ahead of Game 4 of the NBA Final give a passionate speech. You had the Miami Heat make an announcement to call members of Congress. You had other sportscasters using their platforms. You had the Yankees and Tampa, I think, turn over their social media channels to advocate for gun safety and gun reform. Do the protesters in the street feel that wind at their back as they confront what looks like a pretty fortified NRA conference?
Yeah, I think they definitely feel the wind at their backs. I think the unfortunate thing, Nicole, and I'm sure you understand this exact feeling, they felt this feeling before. People thought that after Sandy Hook that there would be some change at a federal level. People thought after the shooting in El Paso that there would be change at the state and federal level in terms of how people have access to guns and people's access to guns. So they feel like they've been let down before. And you continue to hear that is not going to stop them from doing that. And that's why you have scenes like the one we're seeing here, where you're having those verbal confrontations. It's important to note, I haven't seen anything physical here. It's been just the verbal confrontations, but you get the passion, you get the tension, and that's because both sides, people on both sides, see this as an essential issue. They see this as a matter of life and death. I've been talking to some of the convention goers. They say their heart breaks with what you saw with the school shooting this week, but they feel that the Second Amendment and their protections are what are more important, and they fear that any progress that they do, if they give up on increase in the age to purchase a weapon, for example, they fear that will turn into something worse, a full-on confiscation. So that's what you're hearing from the passion on both sides, Nicole.
Well, one is passion, the other is delusion, but I know that is the view. Shaq Brewster, live in Houston for us. Thank you so much. We're back with State Representative Jasmine Crockett. I mean, Jasmine, no one in the arena is talking about taking anything. And in fact, if you think a background check is going to keep you from your AR-15, you clearly shouldn't have one. And if you think waiting till you're 21 is going to keep you from your AR-15, I mean, it's just nonsensical. I mean, one side is at the table with the most reasonable policy proposals that are frankly quite modest, maybe too modest, but they have the support of 85% of the public behind them. The other is swathed in frothy delusion that someone's coming to take their guns.
You're absolutely right. You know, one thing that I do want to make clear, because it does seem like everything is so crazy in Texas. You know, I was a joint author on a good common sense piece of legislation as it relates to guns. And, you know, it got a hearing and we were really excited because that was a huge step for us to have a hearing. But that bill never saw the light of day. It never made it to the floor. It was never going to be considered. And this is the deadlock that we find ourselves in. We end up in these culture wars and we end up with literally these delusions of grandeur, right, about the Second Amendment and what that means. And I was consistently having to tell my colleagues, it seems like the only amendment y'all care about is the Second Amendment, right? Like there's a bunch of other ones that you guys completely ignore. And so, you know, I'm like, I don't understand why there's so much emphasis put on it. And one of the reasons that I always wanted to emphasize to my colleagues that I own a firearm, that I am licensed to carry, is so that it couldn't be this rhetoric of, oh, the Democrats are just anti-guns. It's not about being anti-guns, but it is being like literally pro-life, like being smart about this, right? We were seeing, in fact, I believe when we were debating this terrible bill, we actually had a child be killed in a Walmart parking lot because their parents had a firearm in the car. Mom ran into the store. Kid gets a hold of a gun and ends up accidentally discharging the firearm. And so I was like, this is more reason why we at least need to emphasize training. I mean, they wouldn't give at all. You know, this was the first major bill that I realized that there was something terribly broken in the state house. I actually was brought to tears because I was supposed to do an amendment as it related to protecting our courthouses. We know that emotions are high in our courthouses, whether it's a family courthouse or if we're going into a criminal courthouse. The last thing that we needed to do was loosen the restrictions as it relates to firearms in these very locations. And I was supposed to talk about the fact that I had been involved in a courthouse shooting before, and I was supposed to tell my story. But the amendment before that was an amendment about white supremacists not being able to own firearms. And sadly enough, I saw that amendment fail, and it failed upon party lines. They would not even agree that white supremacists should not have firearms. And so you can only imagine how reasonable they were as we were attempting to at least put some sort of safeguards in the form of amendments around this terrible bill. And now we see yet another historic tragedy that really could have been prevented. And I get it. I'm a criminal defense attorney. There are some people that are just going to break the law. I get it. But what we can do is make it more difficult for them to be able to carry out these types of things. We know that there is no reason that anyone, especially an 18-year-old, needs to walk around with an AR-15. That's not about protection whatsoever. And at least if it wasn't that he could have his hands on this type of firearm, then maybe he would not have been able to carry out such a large tragedy in such a short amount of time.